A subscriber recently emailed me about a user they'd come across on a website known as Pixiv. This is no ordinary artist sharing their work though, it's a predator hiding in plain sight. Let's investigate. If you enjoy internet mysteries and generally disturbing content, feel free to subscribe and turn on notifications for more content like this. If you're interested in supporting the channel, you can become a Ko-fi member or a channel member to gain access to uncut videos and other perks, or you can leave me a tip by clicking the thanks under this video. Thanks to anyone who considers this. This video will centre around pedophiles and the abuse of children. Viewer discretion is advised. You can click the link in the description to become a Ko-fi member and watch an uncut and ad-free version of this video, which features extra details that were unsuitable for this cut. If, like me, you've never heard of Pixiv, it's an online community for artists, basically the Japanese version of Pinterest. You can post your artwork on there and follow and message with other creators. The account we're going to focus on today is named Ica4eva. I'm not even sure I'm pronouncing that right, but let's just call this person Ica. They're 47 years old, born on the 14th of April, and that's pretty much the only personal details revealed on here. They don't mention their country or gender, or much else about themselves, apart from their messed up interests. The description on their page reads, "Just an average sexual liberationist who enjoys making illustrations and comics with other artists." In case you were wondering, sexual liberationist appears to be a sugar-coated term for a pedophile. Ica also refers to themselves as a MAP, minor attracted person, so again, a pedophile. They said in a post that they are attracted to children aged 5 to 12, and they have been ever since they were 10 years old. In a post titled, "My Mapness Part 1, Ica talks about being a sexual person from a young age. They reference an incident when they were 7 years old where a camp counselor initiated inappropriate contact with them and they enjoyed it. But even before this, they were aware of such activity and would roleplay with their girlfriends in elementary school." Ica goes on to imply that they don't think it's fair that children aren't allowed to vote, and about how they're a freedom lover, quote, "As I would learn later in life, freedom is never a privilege, it has to be developed and defended." Out of context, that's a line that many of us can agree with. Throughout much of history, many people have never experienced the privilege of freedom, from slaves to LGBT people. Some are still denied freedom today. Everyone should have the freedom to be themselves and live their lives how they see fit, providing they aren't harming anyone else. But somehow I don't think pedophiles can be included in that, and that's exactly the type of freedom Ica wants. A lot of the reasoning behind Ica's views centres around their idea that the age of consent and other laws put in place to protect children from adults is actually a way for adults to control children. Yeah, it's absolute insanity. They explained this in a post titled, "Protection versus Empowerment." It read, "There is a war on sexual expression or obscenity. Some states in the US have imposed age restrictions on sites. Laws have become increasingly harsher on people who commit SA towards children. Censorship laws have become more strict, and all for the purpose of protecting children from what has been determined by governing adults to be harmful. Yet children are sexual beings without pornography. Governments do not want to acknowledge the sexuality of children because that would empower children to make more decisions outside of adult approval. If children are respected as competent beings, adults lose their so-called protection of children. That protection is nothing more than social slavery until a certain age is reached. where children have been conditioned to be how certain adults want them to be, and to apply that conditioning to future generations. This validates the paradigm of adults are more than children. This stands to reason why there is propaganda about child abuse. Adult protection means adult control. Not to say that abuse does not exist. All people, regardless of age, should be empowered to individually determine and stand against abuse or anything that causes them harm. A particular nation is seeking protection from enemies, so they turn to a superpower nation for assistance in protection. In exchange for support, that nation increases censorship laws on sexual expression. It is a lose-death situation. Lose the freedom of sexual expression or lose a nation. Certain countries have long wanted lolicon and shotacon eliminated because it encourages paedophilia. The issue is not about stopping SA of children, but keeping the main facets of an adult-run society dominant, and thus keeping the paradigm of adults are more than children. In the sexual and cultural revolution of the 1970s and 1980s, children were given more exposure and even sexual right. However, as the power of children increased, adults saw their ruling status being challenged. Instead of empowering children to become people who make their own choices, adults began to objectify morality based upon fundamentalist principles. Children were forced to believe that a fabricated higher power, and the government, could shelter their innocence from the storm. If they believed that they were equal beings, particularly sexual beings, then they would be deviants, another term designated to keep control of people. If children had the same rights as adults, there would not be competition or inequality. There would be no need for falsifying religious scriptures for propaganda. There would be respect for the individual to make choices regardless of age. There would no longer be terms such as adult or child. Society in general would be made to accommodate everyone, and we can always have that society. Stay tuned and stay proud. So this is actually wild. It's bad enough being a paedophile in secret, knowing you should be ashamed of it, but it seems even worse boldly speaking publicly about it like this, trying to normalize it and acting like it's everyone else's views who are wrong. How warped does your adult mind have to be to advocate for children having contact with adults under the guise of empowering them? This is not about children having less rights. Ultimately, if they do engage in activity with another child or an adult, it's not like they're going to be punished for it, but the adult absolutely would, or at least should. Since Ica is the adult in this situation, they're the one affected by these laws, and they're trying to make it sound like they're more concerned about the children. They acknowledge that abuse does exist, but, quote, all people, regardless of age, should be empowered to individually determine and stand against abuse or anything that causes them harm. They don't seem to understand that an adult having contact with a child is inherently abusive, because the child isn't old enough to understand the ramifications of such contact and therefore isn't old enough to actually consent. As I mentioned earlier, Ica actually had an experience when they were 7 years old where an adult camp counselor initiated contact between them, and it doesn't sound like they experienced any trauma from it, at least consciously. In fact, it seems to have been quite the opposite. They enjoyed it, and it convinced them that such contact is harmless and should be normalised. Realistically, the encounter likely did have some effect on Ica, though I doubt they'd admit it here, if they would even admit it to themselves, because it totally goes against their narrative that such contact is not damaging to children. Even if it really didn't affect them negatively though, that doesn't mean it doesn't negatively affect the vast majority of children who experience that, and Ica doesn't seem to consider this at all. In the post, Ica also briefly mentions children having access to adult content, and this is something that is a lot more normalised in society. It might be illegal, but many people in the UK and US, for example, began consuming such content when they were underage, and many of those that continue the habit into adulthood will swear blind it's not harmful. Meanwhile, they can't go 24 hours without it. The relationship many people have with real-life intimate contact has been visibly shaped by years of unlimited and unrestricted viewing of content on a screen, and personally I don't see many benefits of that. Not to mention all the messed up categories, like barely legal and incest, which undeniably has an impact on what people are into and how they view others. These effects will inevitably be more apparent the younger someone was when they started watching this, and I really don't think it's a good thing for children to be doing, despite the fact that it is somewhat normalised. Anyway, these things being illegal for children is not an infringement on their rights, it's a measure put in place to protect children from people like Ica, who really don't care about the safety of children, they just want to abuse them without any consequences. This idea that it's unfair to children is elaborated on further in a post titled Double Standards. It read, "In most cases, it is permissible to have cartoon child characters in every conceivable situation, yet when it comes to real-life children being sexualized, there is disgust and even advocacy of violence. Cartoons may be simply fictional art characters, but they are still based on actual human beings, particularly children. There would not be such detail and dedication of the art if there was no inherent sexual attraction to children. Furthermore, it is okay for adults to be sexual and to even dress like children during sexual activities. Yet if children were to behave the same way, they would get scolded and severely punished for that behaviour. Such children would be often asked where are their parents to teach them proper morals, yet adults get full permission to be as immoral as they prefer and to whatever extremes without the consent or guidance from parents. These are examples of double standards. To quote from George Orwell's Animal Farm, all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. People are forced to accept double standards so as to be compliant to authority figures. In the case of children, they have to accept double standards to purport the standard that adults are better than and have power over children. And this consequently affects adults in that when they reach a certain age, they believe that they have to work for authority figures under harsh and oftentimes dangerous working conditions and for inadequate wages. Meanwhile, the authority figures can give themselves massive pay increases and even violate the laws without little or no impunity. There are two things that can reduce the power of double standards. The first is knowledge. With each generation comes much greater knowledge and self-awareness over the previous ones, which means that people, both children and adults, can take the knowledge and apply it to create a society of fairness for everyone. That is the second thing, liberation. No one should be subjected to unfairness because of a perceived lack of cognitive or physical ability based on the number of one's age. Let there not be double standards, but social guidelines for all people that can be changed if the people prefer. Stay tuned and stay proud. First of all, I have no idea where Ica got it from that it's permissible to have child cartoon characters in every conceivable not safe for work situation. I don't know of anyone who would condone that. I am aware that cartoon CP is technically legal in some countries, so maybe Ica lives in one of those countries, but the vast majority of people who are against contact with children will also condemn cartoons depicting such contact, and I think we can assume that anyone producing this content is a paedophile themselves. Ica makes a good point that it isn't unheard of for adults to dress like children during intimate activities. One example that comes to mind is women dressing like schoolgirls. This is one fantasy that always seemed pretty messed up to me. If you wouldn't find an actual schoolgirl attractive, why would you want an adult woman to dress as one? Of course though, Ica isn't highlighting this to suggest that adults stop infantilizing themselves during intimate activities, they're using it as a point for why children should be able to engage in these activities. As I already said, laws are in place prohibiting this to protect children from abuse, not to perpetuate inequality between adults and children. There are actually some situations that I could agree with Ica's logic in, just certainly not with the topic they're applying it to. Children arguably should be given more choices in many aspects of life. For example, I don't agree with forcing religion on children. I think they should have the right to decide for themselves, especially in cases where the religious views of their parents might prevent them from receiving life-saving medical treatment, such as Jehovah's Witnesses refusing blood transfusions. Religion aside, parental consent is needed in various countries for medical treatment. Individuals under the age of 18 cannot make their own autonomous medical decisions in France, Italy, Greece, and Finland, just to name a few. Obviously, I don't think 3-year-old children should be making their own decisions, but if a 13-year-old feels like they need therapy, for example, I don't think they should have to get their parents' consent. Overall, I'm absolutely in favour of children having more rights to make decisions for themselves when it comes to situations where it would improve their well-being, and especially when it would reduce their chances of dying. But allowing adults to have inappropriate contact with children does not fit into either of these, and would even have the opposite effect. Another post from August 2024 included 5 questions asked by Ica's followers and their responses. Let's take a look at each individually and I'll provide some commentary along the way. Do you think the AOC should be lowered or even outright abolished? And if you do, to what? The AOC, or age of consent, should not be abolished but be replaced with the ability to consent. People should primarily determine for themselves whether or not they want to consent to sex or to anything else. No one should ever be forced into doing something they do not want to do, regardless of age. This is where law must be involved. There should be laws to protect the ability and willingness to consent, instead of predetermining that people cannot consent because of age factors. I kind of touched on this before, but people already determine for themselves what age they want to become active in this way. The age of consent in the UK is 16, yet it's estimated that up to a third of British people have already had contact before this age, and guess what? We're not imprisoning or punishing all these children in any way. The law is effectively a guideline for anyone under the age of 16, but a way of punishing adults who have contact with anyone under this age. So again, Ica is not concerned about the children, who won't be punished anyway. They're concerned about adults like themselves who can be punished if they go for someone younger than 16. I personally think the age of consent in the UK should be 18, not 16. It's crazy to me that a fully grown adult could go for a 16-year-old and face no consequences. But anyway. Even with the age of consent, children are still groomed and even SA'd by much older adults, and if we abolished it, this would inevitably increase. As it stands, we consider anyone under the age of 16 unable to consent, so if an incident is taken to court, there is no question of whether or not it was consensual. Once you pass 16, if you get SA'd, the chances of getting that person convicted are tiny, because it's so hard to prove that it wasn't consensual. So you'd absolutely see more children being SA'd and nothing being done about it. Let's not forget that Ica is attracted to children as young as 5 years old. I don't think I need to explain why the idea that a 5-year-old could consent is just absolutely ridiculous. Question 2. In general terms, what steps do you consider necessary to change the public's perception of maps? Perception of maps will change when the labels of adult and child are abolished. When adults and children are equally regarded as people, not because of their ages, but because society acknowledges them as living, rational beings that can consent to whatever they prefer. The first step is the self. The self must be developed independently of the expectations of being an adult or a child. The person should not mature, but nature. Instead of expectations based on the number of the age, allow the experiences of life to be the guide. While I do think it's a little strange that people suddenly go from being classed as a child to an adult between 17 and 18, one day you can't do much legally, and the next you can smoke, drink alcohol, gamble, etc. I see no benefit to children for the labels of adult and child being abolished. There might not be much difference in someone aged 17 and 18, but there are many clear differences between someone aged 12 and someone who's 25. It's also true that everyone matures at different ages. You could argue that some people still aren't mature enough to gamble at 18. When it comes to what age people are mature enough to have intimate contact, even that is going to be different for different people. As I said, many people do so before the age of consent, but a lot of those actually later regret not waiting, and some aren't ready until well over the age of 16. None of that changes the fact that adults should not be going for children though, and that's why we need an age of consent. It doesn't matter if a 15-year-old believes they are personally mature enough for it. What matters is the adult twice their age who's going to take advantage of them and cause long-lasting trauma that they may never totally recover from. Question 3. Fantasies of what you personally would do to a kid. A beautiful night, me and a romantic partner sitting on the grass gazing at the constellation while sharing a bottle of wine paired with chocolates, and we enjoy each other's thoughts and feelings. That is something I truly desire more than anything, intimacy with a partner of my choice. Thank God that wasn't some super graphic erotica or anything, but still, this person is talking about a romantic date with a child as young as 5 years old. I can't even find the words to describe how disgusting this is. It's also incredibly predatory that they're talking about sharing a bottle of wine with a literal child too. As if their age wouldn't be reason enough for them not being able to consent, Ica has to get them drunk so they're even less capable of consenting. Anyway, I don't have much to say on the last 2 questions, so I'll just read them then move on. Question 4. Should either schools or parents teach their children on sex, and to what extent? Instead of teaching through an institution or through parenting and guardianship, society as a whole should guide people towards the wholeness of life. Sex and its components are only a small part of the larger microcosm that is life. There should be no separation between sex and society, nor should people be ashamed to express their sexuality and identity. Sex creates life, and all of life should present to everyone in its many forms. Question 5. What motivated you to come out and to commission artists and CGers to create works that you share? Actually, I proclaimed myself as a map long before I came to Pixiv, but to digress, as my creative skills and influences grew, so did my willingness to express myself as a map. Even though some people disassociated themselves from me, I managed to garner better followers who motivate me to hopefully motivate other maps and people of all ages to express themselves also. Earlier in the video, we covered a post titled My Mapness Part 1. There's actually a part 2 of this also, which reveals details more sickening than the first. Turns out Ica has actually been charged for viewing CP, which honestly isn't even surprising. They're advocating for the age of consent to be abolished and for adults to be able to have contact with children, but they clearly aren't prepared to wait for the possibility of the law changing in their favour, which I hope to God it never does. At this point, I don't even know how they can convince themselves that their beliefs are in children's best interest, considering they literally willingly watch children being abused to satisfy their own urges. That said, I'm sure they are of the belief that CP is a victimless crime. I've heard before of pedophiles who acknowledge that it would be wrong to SA a child in real life, but who still watch CP because they think it's saving children from being harmed. This obviously isn't true. A child has to be SA'd in the first place for there to be footage of it online, and the more people who watch it, the more demand there is for more to be created and more children to be SA'd. Knowing that Ica has watched CP, and likely still does, solidifies to me that the law won't prevent them from doing what they want to do. They are so convinced that their delusional beliefs are based in logic and in the best interest of children, or they really don't care about any of that because they want what they want and don't care who gets harmed in the process. They're just trying to rationalise it to everyone else. Either way, given the opportunity, I'm 100% sure that they would SA a child if they haven't already. Anyway, let's take a look at the post. In the late 90s, because of the internet, CP was making a return. I saw CP, but I never downloaded or kept the images. I still got caught, but only on a minor level. I was told by the court that if I attended a counselling course that my charges for viewing CP would be dropped, so I agreed, yet my family disowned me. The counselling was one of the worst but most enlightening times of my life. The counsellors were so mentally and verbally abusive to the point that I verbally exploded on one of them. 2 members of the group that I was in took me outside to calm me down and told me not to play their game. After I did my time, I joined support groups for people with paedophilia. One of those members re-educated me on adult and child labels, such as are those terms actual states of being or imposed labels from a society. People are adults or children because they are categorised as such, same for being gay or straight, Christian or heathen, black or white, rich or poor. In college, I had a brief relationship with a sociology professor whom I based my first comic series on. I came out to her about my attraction to children. She told me about how ancient civilizations before Greece had intergenerational relationships. Also, she had an encounter with a female PE teacher in junior high school. I was relieved that I could confide in someone who had an open mind. I still miss her to this day. Then I saw something that truly changed me, the interview with Lindsay Ashford. He spoke so openly, directly, honestly, and intelligently about him being a paedophile and how society regards children as property instead of people, which is why children are not regarded as sexual or even social beings. He laid the framework that there was a much greater purpose to paedophilia than just with kids. After my 3rd layoff from a company that was going bankrupt, I dropped out of society. From that point on, I devoted myself to developing myself as a functioning, minor-attracted person. I read many books by people who re-educated themselves out of societal norms, like Malcolm X and Miyamoto Musashi, and I devoted myself to social change for all people of all ages. I became pro-choice, having the right to choose. And now I am here with the artists, supporters, and everyone else who make my attraction valid. The support for this audiocast has been tremendously positive. I could say thank you 1,000 times and the gratitude would not be enough. But there is still more I want to say. Stay tuned and stay proud. One thing I find concerning about this post is that it seems the internet has given Ica a space where their highly inappropriate feelings and preferences are being validated. When they were charged for watching CP, their family disowned them, and now they're part of an online community where people are supporting them, encouraging them even. You can see this in the comments on their post too. While there are a few rational people calling out how disgusting all this is, there are plenty of other users who are expressing support, some identifying as maps themselves, and others seemingly just sympathetic towards Ica's struggles, which is honestly bizarre. Now, I don't think paedophiles freely choose to be attracted to kids. and it's one thing to feel sympathy towards those who know it's wrong, choose not to act on it, yet they have a hard time getting any help for it. That's not this person though. Ica has been caught watching CP, and they literally set up a whole account on Pixiv to try and convince people that adults having relationship with children should be normalised. If you're not a paedophile yourself, I don't understand how on earth you can have any sympathy for someone like this. While I've been working on this script, Ica's account has actually been deleted. I don't know if they deleted it themselves, or if Pixiv took it down. Either way, this is of course a good thing. It's one less dangerous person trying to normalise harming children online. As a result though, I'm pretty much out of content to show you for this account. Everything we've covered so far is what I screenshotted when the account was still up, but I saw so much more and so much worse. I remember one post that was explaining to other paedophiles how not to get arrested, and included advice such as only viewing CP and never downloading it, and avoiding sharing illegal content with anyone else, or even talking to anyone else about their attractions. Ica also uploaded a lot of artwork themed around children. It wasn't explicit per se, as in the cartoon children weren't naked at least, but certainly highly inappropriate. Let's just say they were scantily clad. One I remember showed a man and a woman about to get married, and behind the woman's back, the man said to a child standing there something like, "Wait around in case this doesn't work out." There were others that showed an adult man giving a child flowers, and in other situations to make it look like they were in some kind of non-problematic romantic relationship, all trying to make it seem normal and innocent. Ica is far from the only paedophile on Pixiv trying to advocate for these atrocities, though the other ones I came across mostly just tend to post artwork without the commentary. One example is a user named Choiceman, who shares colourful artwork, often featuring cats and other characters, which I feel is likely a way of trying to draw children in and get them on board with all this. A child who comes across this could easily be so distracted by the cute cats that they don't realise how sinister all this is. Children in general are less likely to see a problem with this stuff anyway, because they're the victims in it. Obviously I know how wrong all this is now, but I remember being 13, 14 and there were always older men adding me on Facebook and making inappropriate comments on my photos. One of my friends in school was even in a relationship with an 18-year-old, and none of us really saw anything wrong with it back then. We didn't know what grooming was, and didn't realise these people were predators who just wanted to manipulate us because we didn't really know how to protect ourselves. Another problem I have with Choiceman's page, which was also a thing on Ica's too, is the comparison to the LGBT community. I actually spoke about this in my recent video on the Tumblr consang community, which is basically incest, and it really bothers me how these people advocating for activity that is not only illegal for a good reason, but highly immoral and dangerous to others, particularly children, will try to align themselves with the LGBT community. They will say they're being oppressed because of their sexuality, and point out how it was once illegal and socially unacceptable to be gay or trans, but society eventually started shifting, so the same should happen for paedophiles. Being LGBT is not inherently harmful in any way though, whereas being a paedophile is absolutely inherently harmful because you're an adult preying on a child. You are not being oppressed by laws preventing you from abusing children, and to compare that to the contact between, say, two consenting adult gay men is absolutely ridiculous. The worst part is, you won't get any more support for paedophiles this way, you'll just further stigmatise those who are LGBT. Another tactic Choiceman uses to attempt to gain acceptance for paedophiles is trying to claim that society being against them affects other people who aren't actually maps. One example is a post that read, "This is Joytron. Joytron is aromantic and asexual. They didn't used to know that, and they mistook feelings of friendly fondness for crushes. One day they had such feelings for an 8-year-old child and decided they were a map. These thoughts brought them a lot of pain. They stopped feeling safe with their friends who reblog posts promoting violence to maps. They grew afraid of their own family. If not the map stigma, their search for their identity would have been much more peaceful. If map resources were available, they'd have figured it all out sooner. Stigma harms innocent people, both maps and non-maps, and you never know who you hurt when you perpetuate it. I'm not personally aromantic or asexual, so please correct me in the comments if I'm wrong on this, but as I understand it, someone who is aromantic and asexual has no attraction towards other people, at least not in those ways. I guess they could still be in a relationship and enjoy spending time with their partner, but have no desire to engage in any intimate activity. With that being said, how could Joytron possibly think they were a pedophile if they don't have romantic or sexual feelings towards anyone, children or adults? As I said, admittedly it's almost impossible for me to truly understand how it feels to be asexual or aromantic because I'm not myself. So let's say I'm wrong, and it is possible to confuse the feelings of friendly fondness, as the post puts it, towards a child with being a pedophile. I still don't see how this is an argument in favour of destigmatising pedophiles. The post says, if not the map stigma, their search for their identity would have been much more peaceful. It also would have been more peaceful if this person had access to resources to allow them to understand their asexuality. Why on earth do we need to start accepting pedophiles for that? This is such a bizarre example anyway. It's estimated that less than 1% of the population is asexual, and even less are also aromantic as well. The percentage of people who identify as both and have also falsely believed they were pedophiles has to be close to 0. Why is Choiceman picking such obscure situations that hardly affect anyone to justify abusing children? Anyway, I don't know what else I can say on all this. I'm really just sickened by it all, but sadly not surprised. While there are many benefits of anonymity on the internet for normal people, the downside is that it also allows communities like this to exist. Pixiv isn't the only site that has this pedophile problem. It's been a thing on Tumblr and elsewhere for years. If people started posting this stuff on, say, TikTok, they'd probably be hounded, but somehow these communities on some other sites seem to fly under the radar and find more support. Thankfully, Ica's page no longer exists, so that's one less creep spreading this insanity. Let's just hope the rest get taken down too. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts in the comments, plus any suggestions you might have for a future video. If you enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing. Huge thank you to my Ko-fi members and channel members whose names are on screen now. I really appreciate your support. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time in a new video.